Frid och välkomna till dagens uppdatering, och det är Tom Hughes som har ett klipp här som är väldigt allvarligt. Det är ju International Criminal Court som har i sitt säte i Haag, och så är det World Health Organization, och jag ska ta och läsa här ifrån psalm 2 till att börja med. Jag tror vi lever i den här tiden, och det här som folken rasar, det är ju mot Israel, och det säger han att det här handlar om också. Vi ser alltså ett vilddjur som reser sig upp som kommer att föra med sig en kommande antikrist. Psalm 2. Lägg märke till vad det står här, för det här är viktigt. Varför rasar hedna folken? Varför tänker folken fåfängliga tankar? Jordens kungar reser sig upp och förstarna rådslår med varandra mot Herren och hans smorde. Låt oss slita sönder deras band och kasta av oss repen. Han som bor i himlen ler, Herren gör narr av dem. Han talar till dem i sin vrede. I glödande harm förskräcker han dem. Det är jag som har insatt min kung på Sion, mitt heliga berg. Ja, det är ju Messias som sitter där, och han tänker inte flytta på sig, för ingen som kan flytta på honom överhuvudtaget. Men människan håller ju på och spelar Gud, det är det handlar om. Vers 7. Jag vill kungöra Herrens beslut. Han sa till mig, du är min son, jag har idag fött dig. Det betyder inte att Jesus är född, så att säga, utan född på nytt eller något, utan insatt och smord. Begär om mig, så ska jag ge dig hedna folken till arvedel och hela jorden till din egendom. Du ska krossa dem med järnspera, slå sönder dem som lerkrukor. Handla nu vist, ni kungar, låt varna er, ni domare på jorden. Är inte detta väldigt intressant med ICC och detta uppror med pro-palestinier då, som vi vet är mot Israel och är antikristligt, och mot Jesus Kristus, Guds son. Vers 11. Tjäna Herren med fruktan och glädjer med bävan. Ge sonen hyllningskyss, så att han ej blir vred och ni går under på er väg. Ty snart kan hans vrede upptändas. Saliga är alla som flyr till honom. Kära Herre Jesus Kristus, gode Gud, bevara oss i dig, Herre, när din vrede kommer ut över jorden. Lyssna nu till Tom Hughes och det här klippet. Amen.
Agencies, most people think very little of it. In the next few minutes, we're going to pull back the curtain on this most subversive organization. It was officially formed in 2002 and is one of several forces taking the world down the path of totalitarian control by the elites of one world government and of the coming Antichrist. Now with that, work through this with me. On May 20th of this year, the International Criminal Court, also known as the ICC, sought arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and for his defense minister. The ICC prosecutor alleges that Netanyahu and the defense minister bear criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. And get this, as if to balance out their position, they are also seeking arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders. That'd be like indicting Roosevelt for the war crime of commanding troops to kill German soldiers during World War II and then trying to make it seem balanced by also indicting Hitler. Listen, this is just absolutely absurd. There's no balance there, no moral equivalence. The right of defense is absolute. This is yet another manifestation of the anti-Semitism permeating the UN-affiliated institutions. But it's not just that. It's even worse. This is an example of a global court making up rules as it goes along. Rules that give itself even more power. Power far beyond the limits of the international treaty on which it is based. Check this out. I'm going to read to you from Micah chapter 2 and listen to these words. And as we go through this, tell me this doesn't sound like the world that we've entered into. And Micah, he was a prophet to both the southern kingdom of Judah and also the northern kingdom of Israel. And in Micah chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, again, listen to these words. Micah writes, "Woe to those who devise iniquity and work out evil on their beds. At morning light they practice it because it is in the power of their hand." In other words, what Micah is saying, listen, there's evil leaders. And again, he was talking about Judah and Israel back then. But as we look into the future where we are right now, we can see the ultimate fulfillment is still coming, and especially against the people of Israel. But what he says is, look, during the night, while they're awake, these evil people start to get ideas in their minds against the people that they consider basically political or even religious enemies. And then because they have the power given to them by whatever organization they're connected with, they put their evil plans into practice. That's exactly what Micah says. Let me read it to you again. "Woe to those who devise iniquity and work out evil on their beds. At morning light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hands." Remember that as we go through the rest of this. They covet, continues in verse 2, they covet fields and take them by violence, also houses and seize them. So they oppress a man and his house, a man and his inheritance. In other words, they change the rules, they make laws, and they put people in jail, and they actually take property from them because they have manipulated the laws to fit their evil desires. So this is what Micah says. All right, as we work through this again, hold on to that thought, because you're going to see just how much all of this fits. And when we think of the ICC, this leads to a question that has a most disturbing outcome. Here it is. Why does an international court need to deal with individuals? Nations have their own laws and their own court systems. Traditionally, the world's nations have each dealt with the criminals within their own boundaries. Now, continuing, administering your own criminal justice is part of what it means to be a nation. But in the late 1990s, most of the world's nations decided to partially give up their sovereignty over their own criminal justice system. They formed the International Criminal Court. At first glance, the court's charter seems to put extreme limitations on its power, and they can indict, try, and punish individuals for only 4 things. So you think of this. Okay, so they've limited their power seemingly, but did they really? So here's the 4 things: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and for aggression. But it only seems limited until you realize how many ways those 4 terms can be applied. So let's get a little bit of history on the ICC. With that, the ICC is a tribunal court headquartered at The Hague. Also, its rulings supersede the laws and judicial system of individual nations. Also, the ICC is the result of a treaty known as, get this, the Treaty of Rome Statute, or the Rome Statute itself. Now, whenever I see the name Rome in something that has a global effect, my mind always wonders if something like this is indeed part of the coming revived Roman Empire. Okay, now stay with me, because we're going to come back to that thought before we wrap up here. But before looking at that, note also that only the nations who are subject to the treaty are the ones that ratify it. Legally, that is, but apparently theoretically. And let me give you an example of how this is supposed to work. If Great Britain and Japan make a treaty between themselves, no citizens of any other country are subject to its rules. Listen, that's not rocket science. Great Britain and Japan, they make a treaty. It's between them, not between anybody else. Okay, likewise, the ICC is empowered only by the nations who have signed onto it to indict individuals within those nations for certain crimes. If a nation has joined this system, then the ICC can indict, any of that nation's citizens. Its rulings override local and national laws. Okay, we get that, right? But not every nation joined the treaty. For example, the United States, China, Qatar or Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and dozens of other key nations never ratified it, and their citizens are therefore supposedly exempt from its provisions. Now, get this. Likewise, Israel never joined the Rome Statute either. So keep that in mind. By the statute's own rules, Israeli citizens do not fall under its authority. Yet, in May, the International Criminal Court indicted Israel's prime minister and defense minister. With that, everything changed. Folks, this is huge. The nations who have not placed themselves under the rule of this court claim that it cannot indict their citizens, but the ICC says it can, and they did. That position, get this, is backed up by the United Nations itself. The UN says, while not all 193 UN member states are parties to the ICC, it can launch investigations and open cases related to alleged crimes committed on the territory or by a national of a state party to the ICC or of a state that has accepted its jurisdiction. Wow, folks, this is hard to imagine, but this is the world that we live in. So think of it this way. In other words, you can be an American citizen living in Kansas. In your entire life, you may not have ever left the United States, but that doesn't matter. If the ICC chooses, it can decide that one of your actions is aggression against someone in one of their jurisdictions. Hence, they can go after you if they want, or in this case, Israel, even though Israel is not a member, just because they hate Israel. With the backing of the UN, the ICC says it has the power to reach across all national boundaries, regardless of whether or not said nation is a signatory to the Rome Statute. This puts everyone within their reach. And at the same time, we are watching the power grab of other global entities like the World Health Organization, threatening the arrest of people that they claim are spreading disinformation. In other words, information about them that they don't want to become public knowledge. Or think of it like this. If you're saying something and it goes against the narrative that's out there, they're now saying, hey, we want to have the authority to arrest you. So you have the threat of the World Health Organization. We have all the things that the World Economic Forum is saying. And then we have this with the International Criminal Court that seems to have this strange reach into places that make absolutely no sense. So I look at all of these things, and I want you to go back in your mind to Micah chapter 2, where we started with. Remember that? Again, let me read it again. Micah chapter 2. Woe to those who devise iniquity and work out evil on their beds, again, while they're laying in bed at night. And at morning light they put into practice their evil, because it is in the power of their hand. They covet fields and they take them by force, even a man's inheritance. And you look at where we are right now and you think, this seems to be exactly what we are watching take place. So now, let's go back to this. As I mentioned earlier, the treaty establishing the International Criminal Court is called the Rome Statute. For students of Bible prophecy, to me, for example, that is a jaw-dropping name. The Bible teaches that the entity from which the Antichrist will rise and from which he will rule will be a revitalized Roman Empire. So the name Rome Statute resonates deeply with Bible prophecy again, as we look at this, because this is a global reach, reaching everywhere, even beyond their own even reaching to places past where they set their own supposed limitations. It has that global tentacle.